Hello. Today is Tuesday of the third week in Advent, and we have 1, 2, 3 candles lit in the Advent wreath. We're continuing our story of Bartholomew's chapter, and today's chapter is titled Jotham's Journey. Bartholomew looked at his tunic hanging on the end of the stick. He knew that if he reached for it, the older boy would just pull it away. Then they'd all gang up on him and beat him up. On the other hand, he knew he could not get through that circle of older boys, and even if they did, they would catch him and beat him up. And if he just stood there and did nothing, he figured they'd finally get tired of waiting and beat him up. None of these options seemed too pleasant. Andrew must have figured this out too, because he started whimpering quietly beside Bartholomew. The older boys laughed. "Cry, little Andrew," they chanted. Finally, Bartholomew had had enough. He pulled himself up straight, sucked in a deep breath, and looked straight in the gang leader's eye. "How many camels does it take to carry a rabbi?" The boys stopped laughing and stopped taunting Andrew, stopped doing anything, and just stared at Bartholomew in confusion. Finally, the leader screwed up his face and said, "What?" "I said, how many camels does it take to carry a rabbi?" By now, the older boys were completely baffled. "I don't know," the leader said flatly. "3," said Bartholomew. And then he waited patiently until the other boy asked, "Why 3?" "One to carry his body," said Bartholomew, "one to carry his soul, and one to carry his wisdom." The other boys, including Andrew, just looked at him with a "what are you talking about" look, and Bartholomew plunged ahead. "How many camels does it take to carry a rabbi's assistant?" he asked. This time the leader just shook his head mutely. 3, Bartholomew said again. "One to carry his body, one to carry his soul, and one to carry the skunk whose face he stole." The boys stared at Bartholomew, and then the lips of the leader started to curl upward a bit, just a fraction at first, but then more and more until he was grinning. And then he started laughing, and so did the other 2 boys as they got the joke, and so did even Andrew. In a moment, all 3 of the bullies were rolling around on the ground, holding their stomachs, laughing so hard they were crying. When the oldest of the 3 had calmed down enough, he asked Bartholomew, "Did you find that joke in your travels, or did you think of it yourself?" "Oh, it just popped into my head," Bartholomew said innocently, "the first moment I saw the rabbi's assistant." This brought another burst of laughter as the boys all agreed that the rabbi's assistant did indeed look like a skunk. Finally, the leader stood to his feet and held out his hand. "I am Jacob," he said, still laughing a bit, "son of Joab, son of Ethan." "Bartholomew, son of Jehu," Bartholomew said, grasping the other boy's forearm. Jacob lowered his head and looked at the ground. I ask for your forgiveness for my trespass," he said solemnly. "I saw no trespass," Bartholomew answered. "I saw only a friend holding my tunic for me." Jacob looked up and grinned. "And a friend you shall be." The other boys introduced themselves and also apologized. A short while later, they all walked back to the compound, chanting, "One for his body, one for his soul, one for the skunk whose face he stole." After Bartholomew and Andrew rinsed off in the pool, the boys and their new friends sat in a courtyard around a square stone with etchings in it and played a game of King's Ransom. For 4 days, Bartholomew did his chores, got snacks from John, met with Micah for reading lessons, and made friends with all the other boys in Qumran. At the 5th hour, he'd bathe with everyone else. In the morning and evening, he attended prayers, and at meals, he listened to the rabbi droning on, and usually got in trouble for talking when he wasn't supposed to be. At one time, he tried to ask the rabbi about the Messiah's coming birth, but the rabbi became very upset and started shouting that the Messiah wouldn't come for many years and that Nathan must have been spreading lies again and how he'd have to talk to Nathan when he returned. Then, on the afternoon of the 4th day, as he was playing yet another game of King's Ransom with Jacob and his other new friends, Bartholomew heard the watchman in the tower cry out, "Travelers approaching!" Everyone stopped playing and stopped working and stopped studying to stare at the watchman high above them, waiting to hear if danger had come to visit. But the watchman announced, "All is well. It is Nathan returning from En-Gedi." Bartholomew's heart leaped at the words, but he had 3 jackals to Jacob's 2 goats and was about to win the game. It was Bartholomew's turn, so he threw the stones, the black and white sticks, down onto the etched stone. The number of white sticks touching squares with stars was 12. So Bartholomew's jackals ate Jacob's goats, and Bartholomew got to save the king, winning the game. He was just jumping up in celebration when Nathan approached, his arm around a young boy. "Bartholomew," Nathan said, "this is our new friend, Jotham." Bartholomew looked at Nathan with a smile in his eyes that said, "So you really did bring me a gift of a new friend?" And Nathan added, "Why don't you introduce him to Qumran?" Bartholomew bowed slightly and said, "It would bring me great honor." Then, leaning over to Nathan, he whispered, "I'll keep him away from the rabbi." "Good idea," Nathan whispered back. "Come this way," Bartholomew said to Jotham, and the new boy followed him. Jotham was about the same size as Bartholomew. He looked enough like Bartholomew that they could be brothers, except that Jotham looked as if he were used to working outside. He was wearing a tunic so big that he looked like a baggy elephant in it. "Are you an orphan?" Bartholomew asked, politeness not allowing him to comment on the size of the boy's tunic. Jotham shrugged his shoulders. I do not know. I do not think so." "Then where is your family?" Again Jotham shrugged and said, "I do not know. I lost them many days ago, and I have been searching the desert for them." "How do you lose a whole family?" Bartholomew asked, his eyes wide in amazement. Jotham was silent for a few moments, and then he said quietly, "I did a bad thing and ran away into the hills. When I returned, my family had left. They thought I was dead." "Your family moved to a new town just because they thought you dead?" Bartholomew gasped, thinking how his own family would have stayed in Tadake to mourn. "My father is a shepherd," Jotham said sadly. "It is our way." Bartholomew understood now. He also understood the sadness in his new friend, so he changed the subject. "This is our dormitory," he said, pointing to the long building with 3 windows. Then, seeing this was a new word for Jotham, he added, "The place where we sleep. Perhaps Nathan will allow you to place your mat next to mine." "I would like that," Jotham said, a smile finally finding his face. "And this is the scriptorium," Bartholomew said as they continued along the compound. Seeing that this was another new word for Jotham, Bartholomew said, "Come inside. I'll show you." Quietly, the 2 boys stepped inside the dark of the scriptorium. Bartholomew showed Jotham the many monks sitting at tables copying the Torah as a leader read it, letter by letter. Jotham was amazed. Bartholomew slipped Micah a piece of bread. Then the boys returned to the bright sunlight. Bartholomew explained the whole process, finishing with, "In this way, we will have 30 new copies of the Torah in just 2 years." 2 years? Jotham asked. "Yes," Bartholomew said smugly. "It is truly a modern-day miracle. When the copyists have written a book, the scrolls are placed in the urns that I helped to make." Jotham looked as if these ideas were all very strange, and at just that moment Nathan returned. "Jotham, I have a new tunic for you to wear," he said. Jotham gladly stripped off the old oversized tunic and put on the new one, which fit just fine. Then a yell was heard across the compound. "Nathan!" came a sharp cry. It was the rabbi storming across the compound toward Nathan, charging like a lion. "Nathan!" he called again. "Yes, Rabbi, what is it?" Nathan asked innocently as Rabbi huffed and puffed his way over. "You know exactly what it is," the rabbi said as he walked up. "You have once again been spreading your tales of the Messiah against my specific orders." Then the rabbi saw Jotham for the first time and added, "I'd wager you even told this young boy here." Nathan sighed deeply. "Rabbi," he said evenly, "I spread no tale except those that are clearly told in Scripture." The rabbi's face turned purple, and Bartholomew thought his head might pop like a grape. "Now, see here, Nathan. I was studying the Scripture before your parents ever laid eyes on each other, and I know perfectly well they say nothing of the tales you spread. The Messiah will come to us, but we must tarry for many generations before we are worthy of his arrival." Now Nathan began to turn red, and Bartholomew knew this could be a long debate. "We don't need to be worthy," Nathan said, his voice beginning to rise. "We can never be worthy. The whole purpose of the Messiah is to cleanse us in our unworthiness." The argument went back and forth for several minutes, and Bartholomew wondered if he would ever get to talk to Jotham. Nathan kept trying to point out what the Scriptures said about the Messiah coming, and the rabbi kept arguing that the people had to become perfect before the Messiah would appear. All the while, the rabbi's assistant stood back smiling, obviously pleased at Nathan's predicament. "Nathan," the rabbi said finally, "I am in charge here, and you will do as I say or face discipline from the council of elders." "Discipline?" Nathan exploded. "Discipline for reading the Scriptures and seeing in them the truth?" The rabbi started to answer, but was interrupted by an alarm from the watchtower. "Riders!" was the cry. "5 men on horses riding fast from the south." Nathan's eyes widened, and he looked at the rabbi, the argument of a moment ago forgotten. "Decca of Megiddo," he gasped. "I saved this boy from his clutches in En-Gedi, and now he comes for him. I did not believe he would care enough to look this far." The rabbi's face melted into concern and compassion. Looking at Jotham, he said, "You must take the boy to the hills and hide quickly." Before Bartholomew could even say goodbye, the rabbi led Nathan and Jotham toward the back of the compound. Moments later, through the main gate, rode the man Bartholomew had seen and feared on his own trip to Qumran. Black robes billowed in the wind, and dust filled the air as Decca and his 4 henchmen slid their horses to a stop. The rabbi returned from the back of the compound, breathing hard and sweating so much it looked as if he'd been swimming. He waddled quickly over to Decca, folded his hands in front of him as if he were praying, looking as innocent and helpful as possible. "Welcome, friend," he said. "We're looking for a fool and a boy," Decca roared. The rabbi shook his head slowly. No, we have no one here like that." With no warning, Decca punched the rabbi hard, knocking him over backward. The rabbi landed with a thud, and Decca leaned over toward him. "Your lies will cost you your head," Decca screamed, and all the monks and boys who had been gathering around to see what was happening suddenly began to shrink back. "No, I assure you," the rabbi sputtered, "we are a peaceful community. Most of us do not ever leave this place. We seek only God and certainly have no fools here." So sincere was the rabbi's voice that Bartholomew began to think that maybe he really didn't know that Nathan sometimes dressed as a fool. Decca surveyed the compound, looking for a clue. "I will burn this place to the ground if I find you are lying," he said, "and I will kill every man and boy who does not cooperate." At this, the monks and most of the boys began slipping into doorways and alleyways, trying to hide from the evil that had invaded their home. Bartholomew himself slid into the shadows of an alcove. Decca pointed at his henchmen. "You two, search every corner of this place. Tear it down if you have to, and you two, go out the back gate and search the hills." At this, Bartholomew's heart fell. He knew that Nathan and Jotham hadn't had enough time to reach safety, and that the henchman would surely see his friends once outside the walls. With a gulp as dry as the desert sands, he forced himself to leave the alcove and run out into the compound just as the henchmen were getting ready to kick their horses into action. "Kind sir," Bartholomew yelled at Decca. "Kind sir!" "What is it, boy?" Decca bellowed, seeing at once that this was not the boy he searched for. "Kind sir, I have news," Bartholomew said. The rabbi looked as shocked as Bartholomew felt, because Bartholomew had no more idea than the rabbi what he was about to say next. "What news does a boy have that would interest Decca of Megiddo?" Decca roared. "I heard a story. That's it. Yes," Bartholomew said. "I heard a story about a fool and a boy." Decca was still impatient, but Bartholomew had caught his attention. "Speak your story," Decca said. "The fool and the boy, they escaped from Caesarea, and the Romans are chasing them. The boy was a slave who ran away." "And where did you hear such a story?" Decca asked, with so much interest that Bartholomew wished he had stayed back in the alcove. Suddenly he realized he didn't have a good answer for that question. Bartholomew stammered. "Where, boy?" Decca shouted. It echoed off the walls of Qumran. I heard it in Jericho before I came to this place." The rabbi looked at Bartholomew in shock, and Bartholomew himself wondered where this story would lead. "I had many friends there," Bartholomew offered weakly, and he wondered if this would be a good time to tell his camels and the rabbi joke. Decca looked at the boy for a long moment, and when he had worked through all the thought processes, he said, "The boy I searched for was no slave, and he met the fool only last night." Thus Decca dismissed Bartholomew and turned back to his henchmen. "Go!" he ordered, but once again Bartholomew interrupted. "I have a secret!" Bartholomew yelled, and once again the henchman stopped in mid-kick. Decca drew a deep breath and let it out sharply. "A secret that delays Decca of Megiddo had best be of great importance," he growled, "or its teller will find himself missing his tongue." Decca looked straight into Bartholomew's eyes as he said the last of this, and Bartholomew felt as if he were staring into the face of a snake. And he hoped his secret would be important enough. What's going to happen next year? Could I have predicted or planned a year ago for the things that have happened since then? How can I best arrange things so that I can be as happy as God desires me to be? No one knows the future, and no one can possibly plan for everything that might happen. And if we try to live our lives apart from God, there is no way we can make all the right choices to find such happiness. In fact, most choices we make apart from God lead only to disappointment or worse. But just as Bartholomew is able to look some bullies in the eye and make friends of them, God is able to take the difficulties and disasters in our lives and make golden opportunities of them. In Romans it says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him." We do have to plan for our futures and prepare for the coming years, but in all our decisions we have two choices. Try to be our own gods and make the choices we feel like making, or let the one true God be Lord of our lives and seek his counsel in all things. I don't know what the future holds, the saying goes, but I know who holds my future. If we will trust in the Jesus of Advent and the Father who sent him, we will know greater joy and happiness than anything we could possibly have planned for ourselves. And more than that, we'll be ready when evil unexpectedly rides into our lives.